I'm the last survivor of the Holocaust in our family.
Behind the words, pictures, and artifacts in the museum are people whose stories of survival and hope come alive to inspire new generations of upstanders. One by one, these stories stir the soul.
Can there really be hope for us?
See, mine is 40018. My sister was 40017.
Holocaust survivors, their descendants, liberators, champions of justice, and courageous upstanders ask only this: hear my story, so that the lessons they teach will echo for generations.
I will never meet someone else like my father. But there are many of us who, if we come together, can keep his voice alive.
These stories will change you. They will move you to action, inspiring the best of humanity every day.
Hello and welcome. My name is Trinity Johnson, and I'm the Director of Holocaust Programs and Museum Experiences at the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanities Center. Today, I'm joined by 3 guests, and it's an extra special conversation about legacy and also intergenerational storytelling. And I'm so excited for each of you to be with me today, Anneliese, Debbie, and Zach. It's such an honor both to know you, but then also to have you here and share more of your story with us today. So, Anneliese, I want to put you on the spot first.
Okay.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your family, where you're from, when you were born?
I was born in Leipzig, Germany, 1937, which I guess gives my age, and was in Germany until through the war until 1946, at which time we migrated to Austria, and then were in Austria until 1950, until we came to the United States.
Love that very succinct. We're going to jump in a little bit more on your story. So born in Leipzig in 1937, and we know that as a Holocaust survivor, you have quite a story to
Yes.
share with us. When do you remember life changing for you and your family?
Well, I remember in 1942, I was 5, and my parents sort of told me about the bad people, you know. I didn't know what a Nazi was, but the bad people. And I remember in 1942, when my grandmother and my aunt were deported to concentration camp, and my mother said goodbye to her mother and her sister. And I remember them crying. Like I said, I was only 5 years old at the time. And I couldn't understand why that was. And my father, with a language that I could understand, told me that they had to go away, you know, and told me that these bad people wanted us to go away because we were supposed to be on the same transport, and my parents decided to escape. We did not go with them, and we escaped that night.
And so you and your parents went into hiding.
It was my parents and myself.
And made the decision to go into hiding.
We made this. My father had worked ahead of time and knew some people that could hide us, and we left, you know, in separate paths, my mom and I, and my father and another one, and we met at a certain point where we met our first host, and who, of course, these people, not only were they our first hosts, but one knew another one and another one. It was sort of quite a few people that knew us, and that's how we managed to escape, by some very good Christian people helping us. And of course, they would have put their life on that line had they been found out by the Nazis. But that's what we did. We left that same night, knowing we would never return.
Do you remember taking anything with you?
Yeah, I remember taking a cup. My father smoked, and I did not like drinking from anything or eating from anything that he ate because it tasted from smoke. And of all the things, I packed the cup. And and a spoon.
And the spoon had special significance, right?
Yeah, like I said, I still have the spoon, and I know that you made a replica, and I still have that, and I don't have the cup anymore, but I do have the spoon and a lot of memories.
The spoon was your mother's baby spoon, right?
The spoon was my mother's baby spoon, and I also have my uncle's baby spoon. I have both of those.
And a doll, right?
And my doll.
I've heard much about this doll.
Yeah, right. Well, the doll is sort of in pieces. You know, it was celluloid and it broke, but the doll is one that I carried with me through the war, and it reminds me of times that have gone by.
And you alluded to your first host, those brave individuals that took you in, and then also a whole network of people that
There were
your family...
13 people,
Yes.
13 people altogether that hosted us, and I didn't bring the paper, but they actually, my father obtained their signature and a little bit of a history, what they thought of my father and all that. But there were 13 people that actually hid us until we moved to Austria.
Which, when we think about hiding during the Holocaust, a lot of people recall the story of Anne Frank and really being in one hiding place for a prolonged period of time. But it's actually much more common for people to have multiple hiding places.
Right.
13 is a lot.
It really
And
was a lot.
the more you move, the more dangerous.
Exactly, and that's why whenever we moved, my mother and I and my father and I, we always went separate ways.
And then came back together
And
again?
then came back at a certain point.
Were all of the people who helped you nice and accommodating?
In the beginning, yes. I don't know how to follow you. There was one family that hid us, and matter of fact, it hit us after we were bombed out in the apartment that we were in, and this family was a butcher's wife who hid us, and she was very, very nice. But later on, we found out that the father found out that she hid us, that we were Jewish, and he divorced her. It really split up the whole family because she hid a Jew.
And I think it is incredible how brave each of these people were to take your family in, but also very brave of your family to keep going, and that the perseverance and bravery that required. I can't even imagine. After the war, well, actually, you mentioned a bombing, which helped your family in a way. So before this bombing, you were hidden and not really seen.
Exactly.
Right? And this bombing really was a turning point for hiding for
Yes.
your family. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, the thing is, especially this one bombing, and our hosts were going down into the basement, which most people did. That was the safest place to hide. And my mother and I, and we were hiding in the bathroom because the bathrooms were supposed to be the most sturdy place for you to be, holding on to pipes and all that. And finally, the bombs came real close to, they're not the bombs that you think now. They're bombs, they almost look like matchboxes, who ignite. And then I went into a bomb shock, which my mother supposedly carried me down the burning steps. And I don't remember much of that. And I can only tell you that my mother carried me in the basement, and I woke up and my father came in and sort of acted like he was a policeman. He said, "What are you people doing down here? There are people upstairs dying, go help these people," and all this, and we sort of came out of hiding and said we were, from Berlin, but our papers were burned and confiscated, and I mean, we went then into our fictitious name, which was, mine was Annie Freiherr, my mother was Hetty Freiherr, my father was Freiherr, Kurt Freiherr. So
And why Freiherr?
Freiherr means free man. And people listened to him. People went upstairs and helped and all that. And that's where then this family from this butcher, she took, "Why don't I take your child?" And she took me into her home where my father tried to help people to rescue them from the fire and all that. And that's how we became friends, so-called, from this butcher family. And like I say, these people knew other people, but at the time, like I say, they were one of the first people that hit us.
And so when when your family changed their names to
Freiherr
Freiherr and Freeman, right?
Freeman.
So you had false papers.
My father had out during all the free time, while we were hidden, and that he had a friend who was able to obtain, papers that were not filled out, and my father, with a magnifying glass, was able to make a stamp, and you couldn't tell with your own eyes that it was a stamp, but if you took a magnifying glass, you could see the fine little strokes that he did, but it looked like a stamp, with the swastika on it and all that. And from there, like I say, we went, and this was really one of the, I shouldn't say it was one of the last hiding places, because that's when we actually were able to obtain something, because we had a name, we were
Passing.
We didn't have really a religion, and but we were not Catholic. I think evangelist or something, you had to be something, and from there, I think my father made plans. He had someone in Austria that he knew, and who was sworn to secrecy, that we were Jewish and all that. And that's how we managed, to make connections with Austria.
And so once your family was in Austria and passing or hiding in the open, right? Essentially
Yes.
under false identities and papers, what did your family do? How
Well-
did life somewhat under those circumstances, how was it kind of normal?
No, well, we lived on top. Matter of fact, we found an abode above a bicycle shop, and it had a bedroom and a kitchen, and it had a bed that my parents slept in, and it had a crib, and I slept in the crib with my feet sticking out. I mean, well, it was a place to lay down, so, that or the floor. So, and my father then made friends with a priest. He became real good friends with the priest, and he made more friends, and before he knew it, he had received work. Let me go back a little bit. After the war, the French occupied Bludenz, Germany, and there was a great need in the government for French people. And my father spoke 7 languages, and including French, and they hired him in one of the he was like a diplomatic source, and got a very good, had a good occupation, and people really needed him to translate and to explain, and it was a good position for him.
And this was in Austria,
That
right?
was in Austria, in Bludenz, Austria. I went to school, and people didn't know what to think because, and I told them I wasn't Catholic, I was Protestant, and they still wanted me to make the cross, and I didn't do that. And so he says they were going to talk to my parents, and that I didn't do the cross and all that type of thing. And of course, because even though I was supposed to be Protestant, because I wasn't Catholic, I was not allowed to do certain things like other children did. Like, for instance, if they received a good grade or if they received a good honor, they were given a prize or something, which I did not get. But it really didn't affect me that much. I knew I felt sort of safe, and but we went on from there to live there for quite a while.
And then Zach and Debbie, I'm getting to you for sure. I can't wait
okay.
to hear. But one more question just to bring us kind of your family, your father has a job in the local government. You're now going to school. Was your mother working at the time?
My mother was not working.
Okay. But you've now integrated into society, right? And
But
then
I was
the
in
war,
school, but my father was because he had a good position. Then they had dances and balls, and of course my mother was invited, and I remember my father bought or rented a tuxedo, and my mother had flowers, and I thought of myself, from one to another, how things have changed, and of course they made good friends during that time, and one of the friends gave me company while they were at the dance. But life was pretty good for a while, and then my father decided that he talked to the priest first, and he told the priest that what our name was and what religion we was.
and this was after the war, right?
Pardon me?
The war has ended once
The
he
war,
revealed his
the war
identity.
ended 1945. So he talked to the priest, and the priest, he said, "Why would you want to go back and get your original name and go back? Haven't you suffered enough? Why not stay where you are? Enjoy your life." And my father said, "I can't. I'm Jewish. I'm born Jewish. This is who we are." And he just couldn't understand it. And both he and the monk, who was a good friend, tried to persuade my father not to go open, but he did. So we revealed our identity, And my father knew that possibly his job might be in jeopardy, which has not been yet. But he knew the chance that we were going to be taking. But in the meantime, he had already made more friends. And in the meantime, with the power of, there was like a Jewish agency in Bregenz, which is near the city that we lived in. We were able to get some kind of restitution by moving into an apartment that was vacant. And when we went into the apartment, there was this menorah and a Kiddush cup, and thing, and it belonged to a mother of an ex-Nazi. This apartment, and they said that we could go and rent that or live in that apartment, and I guess they felt that was like a restitution. But also they told my father that they could not guarantee the position he was in. It just depends. But right now it was sort of iffy. So we moved into this apartment, and we couldn't see all the relics that were there, that were Jewish relics that were kept by this mother. And we made friends in that little village, this little apartment complex. And I went to school there. I had a school, it was sort of like a part of a school because it was in that little village. And people sort of accepted us as what we were. And till finally, one day, if my father came home and said they felt that they no longer, they gave him a certain amount of time that he would keep his position. So that meant my father then got in touch with the Jewish family service, with his brothers who were already in the United States, and we seek for sponsorship so we would be able to migrate to the United States. My father still had his position for right now, and so between the Hayas and the Jewish Family Service and other Jewish organizations, the United States government being able to get sponsors by my uncles, we were able to make halfway that we would finally be able to get to the United States. So we went for immunizations and all the checkpoints that we had to do. And by the last shot, I got a smallpox, and I broke out in a small case of smallpox. And we had to be quarantined. My father couldn't go to work. Nobody could leave the house. Some people would just leave things in the front door. And so that delayed our trip a whole year. We were supposed to come to the United States in 1949. This shoved it, or we moved it up to 1950. And finally, when I was checked out and I was we were able to finish up our arrangements in order to come to the United States. I mean, there are all kinds of little stories in between. I'm just really doing a synopsis of it.
And I have plenty of questions also
I know
about
you do.
America, but I want to turn it to Zach and Debbie for just a moment. We have heard, a lot of danger, fear, but also resilience and holding on to Jewish identity, especially when, unfortunately, revealing that really shocked the town and eventually caused your father to lose his job. As you've learned your family's history, how has that exploration and that legacy impacted you? And actually, when was the first time either of you learned about your family's history?
I don't remember learning it. It just was who we were. My dad didn't speak much about it, but living with my mom's mom, I don't remember not knowing. I don't remember the day that it was revealed. It was just a part of our family history. I remember my grandmother didn't really talk about the wartime so much, but she shared a lot of stories about being a child, her own childhood, and having fancy parties in the house and people coming dressed in ball gowns, and she would be up on the upper level looking down. So I didn't learn about really much about the Holocaust from her. I think more from my mom. She shared more about what my grandmother shared more about her childhood, what it was like.
So it was after Sunday school one
I
day.
remember.
I had the privilege of being in the Sunday school class of another local survivor who was teaching. It was Yom HaShoah, teaching about the Holocaust. We were out to dinner afterwards, and I looked at my mother and I said, "Was my family in the Holocaust?" And that opened a lot of conversations from there. But one of the very first things that you explained to me and used as a reference point were the menorah and the chalice, which had been in my grandmother and grandfather's house forever. They sat above the staircase in what I knew as grandma and grandpa's house. They've been used at my parents' wedding. It was used at my wedding. And the kind of the physical pieces of storytelling were very important to, a third grader's understanding of that's not just a story that happened over there. Grandma and grandpa also, have this story with them too.
How comfortable did you feel in asking your grandparents about their experience?
Oh, I've always asked.
Yeah.
I think perhaps more
You're
than
still asking.
I still ask. Absolutely.
Because there's so many stories. She's alluding to so many other little
Yeah.
pieces that she's having to leave out, unfortunately.
Even in this today, I've always known about the spoons. Had no idea whether there was a cup involved. Right, even the small stuff. Also so amazing to have your father's diary.
I have a question for you about that
Later, but right. So I've always wanted to know and always been on this path of exploration.
And I think also you've all done your part in educating about this history, which I know really came from you and even your husband, Matt, being so passionate about teaching about the Holocaust, which we will also get into. But I want to come back to coming to America. How difficult was it to adjust to American life after everything you and your family had already experienced?
Well, my father, of course, knew English. My mother didn't know English, and I didn't know English. And it was very interesting because, of course, my father right away said, "You're going to go to school." And I said, "How am I going to go to school? I don't know the language." Well, they put me in, even though I was in 7th grade here, they put me into 5th grade. And they gave me books like See Chuck Run, See Joe Fall, and that's how really I would get these kindergarten books, and I naturally would not do actual schoolwork because I really couldn't understand. But I decided that I would learn and, read these books and listen to records and things like that. And except for the language, of course, math, and that I was all up, I was the same. And then then little by little, I got better into books, and then I got actually into the sixth grade stuff. They started me with little things, and after, I would say, by me working on it, and my father helping me, not doing it for me, but helping me. He refused to do it for me. But after 6 months, I was really able to work and do everything that everybody else did. But it took a lot of work and a lot, because there was history, American history. I didn't know American history. All that I had to learn. And I would say about 6 months, I was pretty well up with everything else. I still lost 2 years, because I lost 1 year during the war and then 1 year here. So I was 2 years older than everybody else in school. But I was determined. I was gonna go make this, and I was gonna learn, and I did. And it worked out for me. I made a lot of Jewish friends. And actually, I was at the synagogue here in the United States the first time. I had never seen a synagogue. But it's funny, because my father and I, we went to Addis, Israel, when it was in Avondale at the time, and that was not such a good experience at that time. Not knowing that maybe one day we'll be joining Addis, which we did. My father, of course, was very, very, we were not also, we were conservative, but Germany was more or less more reform. But I think my parents were mostly conservative and practiced Judaism quite a bit. And I never was bar mitzvah or anything like that. I think they just women didn't do that. And I did go to Weiss Temple at the time for some religious school and that. Then I remember I went to, there was a teacher, his name was Bernstein, who taught at Hebrew University, who also gave lessons, and I went there sometimes, with the bus, and took lessons at Hebrew University with him. But I really did not, I always wanted to have a bar mitzvah, or that far I never studied. Also, in 1959, in 1957, actually, I met my husband. And my husband was Greek. He was a Sephardic Jew, and it was love at first sight. He had gone through the war in a different way than I did, but definitely the same way.
And you met here in Cincinnati, yes?
I met him here in Cincinnati.
Because your family originally went to New York and then came to Cincinnati, right?
Yeah. Well, when we came to Cincinnati, when we came to the United States, our boat, we ended up in New York for 6 weeks. And then my father found that he had his job at the University of Cincinnati. And when we came here, he did not have enough residency here in Cincinnati. At the time, the University of Cincinnati was a city school. It was not a state school. And my father did not have enough residency, so he worked for Standard Textile at the time. And but my husband then he went to school. I remember we went to summer school together. We were just really good friends. And I remember I went to visit my uncle in New Jersey, and I just couldn't stand it. I was lonely and all that. I said, so my mother used to say, "Looks like you more than friends." And I said, "Yeah, I think I am." And when we came back, then we both realized we were more than friends, and we got engaged in 1958.
And you
And
met going to school together.
not to scale. My husband went to Western Hills because he lived out in the West Side, and I went to Woodward High School, and we did all the dances together. Woodward and Western Hills, and then we both went to the University of Cincinnati. He went to, it was called at the time Ohio Mechanics Institute, which is then part of Cincinnati, but he went for engineering and I went for business. And then Matt finished up, and he got a job at General Electric. I also worked for General Electric, and in 1959 we decided to get married. It was an interesting family because Matt's family being from Greece and Sephardic, and I personally never heard of some of these things that they believed in, and my in-laws were very superstitious, and I didn't have a superstitious bone in my body, so it was an interesting situation, with being intertwined with this family. And I was extremely close to my father-in-law. He usually is not very close with women, but he was very, very sweet with me. It was just an interesting situation because the Judaism of the Greeks and that were Sephardic. And the Sephardic, some of the people that are Sephardic did not believe you should marry into the regular, you know, Judaism. And there were some incidences, with some friends, and that they felt, the Sephardic were better than the Ashkenazi Jews. And so, we had then finally my husband didn't hear that. He says, "This is my wife, and we're Jewish, and that's it," and nevertheless, my husband and I, we were married, actually would have been 65 years.
This 66.
66 years now. My father, my husband has been dead for 3 years now. And it was 3 years in November.
But how
Or
beautiful
December.
to hear love wins, right?
Pardon me?
Love wins is what I hear from this story. And you also alluded to Matt being a Holocaust survivor. And I wanted to ask Debbie or Zach, would either of you share a little bit about
Yeah, I wish they
Matt's
would.
story?
Yes.
My dad grew up in a very small town in Greece called Katerini, and he was very spoiled, only child. Mother dressed him in white, so the poor kid never went out to play with other kids because she would scold him if he got his white clothes dirty. So maybe that's where the engineering came from. I don't know. But life, he was spoiled, doted on, and then the war came. I'm sure that there had been some discussion and planning, but the story is told that the telegraph operator received a telegram from the authorities that the Nazis were coming, and that the telegraph operator said, "I will postpone delivering the telegram for a certain number of hours to give you guys a head start. So all the Jewish heads of the Jewish families came together and made a plan to escape. They hired horses and wagons, gathered all the belongings. This part was very interesting that my grandfather knew this, and he came home to my grandmother and my father, and they were going to visit relatives that day. He didn't say a word. He let them go visit the relatives, and then when they came home later, he had told them that we're leaving. Like, just let them have their afternoon, and they gathered all their things up. They all met. They headed up toward the hills. They were stopped by authorities and said, "We can't let you go any further." So my grandfather said, "Who's your superior?" And he said, the officer told him, he said, "Can you get him?" He was a friend of my grandfather's. They played bridge together. And he found them a place to stay for the night and then got permission for them to head up into the hills. They, again, also were hidden multiple different times in all kinds of different places. One place was a barn that was fine until the animals came in, and then when they're trying to eat and the animals were relieving themselves, that wasn't very pleasant. They were taken to one place that seemed very nice. Unfortunately, there were chicken lice, and so they all got lice, and eventually they were able to stay hidden until toward the end of the war fairly safely. There was an incident where my grandmother was appointed by the family to be the speaker because she looked less Jewish than all the others. So one day there's a knock at the door, and there is an SS officer or someone representing that organization, along with the mayor of the town and a local soldier. And the SS officer said, "We want to meet the Jews." The mayor tried to put him off. He finally relented and took them to the house. And the Nazis said, we hear Jews are living here. And my grandmother said, "Oh, no, sir, there's no Jews here. We're refugees from Asia Minor." Meanwhile, the soldier standing there knew my grandmother, knew she was Jewish, and he didn't say anything. And so after the war, they were able to make it back to Salonika, where they had some family originally. People were kind. Maybe they went back to Katerina. I can't remember which one. And people gave them, my grandfather had a connection that let them stay in a really nice house. All of the women apparently propagated because that's the only way they were going to survive, is to have more children, and eventually came over to the United States. They were thinking about Israel, but according to my father, my grandfather really didn't want to live on a kibbutz. He didn't want to have to do night duty, nor did he really want to have to work with children and take care of other people's children, because he wasn't interested in doing that for his own, because men at that time didn't take care of children. So they figured the United States would be better, and they came to Cincinnati, were sponsored by family. And from what I understand, what I recall, you guys met on a blind date.
Yeah, that was really strange. I don't know if you want me to go into that.
Yes.
Well,
and also, will you share when it came out that you both had similar hiding stories from during the war? How early did that factor into?
Oh, that
meeting?
factor into quite early, because when my husband and I met, we talked on the phone a long time, and at the time they still had party lines, and I would be on the phone, and I was so often the party line was, "When are you getting off?" And I said, "I'll be off in a minute," and I'm still on the phone and Matt would relate all the stories, what he did and what they went through, and we sort of exchanged stories of what happened to us. So, but like Debbie said, I was at the time they had fraternities and sororities in high school. This was in the 50s. And I was president of my sorority, and I was the program. I had to sing or something like that. And the guy that I was supposed to go with, that was my date, he had an automobile accident, and he couldn't go. And Esther, who is Matt's sister, who went to
Cousin.
Western Hills, who was also my sorority sister, said to me, "Why don't you go with Matt? He doesn't speak much English." But I said, "Well, I don't speak that much English either." He said, "Why don't you go with Matt? Let's see. Let's see if Matt will go with you to the." I said, "Okay." I mean, I wasn't so enthused about getting on a blind date, but I said, "Okay." So I went with Matt, and did at the time he had to take a bus because he didn't have a car, and it was just a different life at the time. He took a bus out, and we went, and I think it was Mecklenburg Gardens or something. I had to sing my song, and finally made it in there, and you know the entertainment was late, and then we had to take the bus back. Matt took me back then he had to go back to Price Hill, but I think it was love at first sight meeting Matt. And matter of fact, I remember going out one more time with this guy that I dated, and I called him Matt, and he says, "I know where your heart belongs," and all that. And that was the end of that. And from then I was just dating Matt, and so
I'd not heard that story.
Is that amazing?
Did you know that?
No.
Yeah. No, that's how Dad and I met, and then, like I say, I went out this one guy once more, and I called him Matt, and he sort of laughed. He said, "I know where your heart belongs to." We stayed friends, but not went out. And but we were on the phone for hours telling our stories, of what we did and what he did, and it was really, and it brought us so much more closer together. And Matt was the son that my mom never had, and they were very, very close.
So Hilda and Walter
Well,
approved.
Walter died. My father died 2 years after we came to the United States. So he was only 54, and he passed away. And my mother, God bless her, lived till she was 97. Yeah.
Yeah. Something else you mentioned that you sing. Now I understand maybe where that love of singing comes from for both of you, since I've heard both of you sing so often. Debbie, this year, and you had mentioned it's been 3 years since we lost Matt, and this year in 2025 was the first time you've shared your father's story. What was that journey like for you, and what was it like to keep his story alive?
Well, I was asked if I would talk about the Jews of Greece for an organization I'm involved in. And I said, well, I don't know that I can talk about the Jews of Greece. I can talk about my family. Or maybe they asked me to talk about my family and then expanded it to the Jews of Greece. So I had to do research because I didn't really have details on my dad's story. So you were kind enough to send me a video, and it was about an hour long, but I got to be with my dad.
Yeah.
That was really special because now I was really paying attention. In the past you hear the stories but you don't pay attention for details. So, and then I did some research on the first Jew ever to be discovered in Europe was in Greece. And so that was really interesting to hear, the what the life of Jews was like up until all the way until today. So that was really a nice way to reconnect with him.
And it's interesting, you've alluded to so many stories we're not going to have time to get to. You're still learning even more stories about your father. And also we have this journal, or really now a book form of your grandfather's great-grandfather,
Yeah.
Walter's
Yeah.
writings.
Right.
And you really were the first one to tell me about this, that your family had. And I know that you've explored that writing. Was there anything you learned maybe about your family that you had not heard from others?
I mean, first of all, the genius of my great grandfather. Spoke 9 languages, prolific writer.
That's true.
I mean, we say diary, books worth of writing that we've had translated and that cousins have put in context around and just really explored. He was a satire writer as well. He was a great satirist, um, and would sit there listening to the BBC and the Voice of America, and would get the news and satirize it in his own words, and would write about the political figures and historical figures, and insult them and make fun of them.
Right.
It just incredible writing. Um, Wrote down everything. I mean, Grandma, you talked about the priest and the monk, and he just went into so much detail. He At times it was like reading a screenplay, right? He would write down conversations verbatim of how they happen. He was especially, based on what I read, very focused on that 5 to 6 year period, 4 to 5 year period between the end of the war and the immigration to the United States, right? When they were living out, when they were known to be Jews, sorry, not known to be, when they were living as Protestants in Bludenz, and not living openly as Jews, but he was a liaison, right? He was a hugely important figure in Western Austria
He was.
during the French occupation, and no one knew he was a Jew. There have been books written. I mean, he's still, even in the towns, and not just in Bludenz, but in all of Western Austria, there's records of him. Like this wasn't a small deal, and then he came out as a Jew. And how he processed that through his own versions of satire, and then started satirizing the townsfolk. But for me, they could have lived that life for the rest of their lives. He could have risen to a fairly high stature in post-war Austrian French politics.
You're right.
They didn't have to leave.
Why would you sacrifice everything that you did to then survive and then give it all up?
Mm-hmm.
But it's very interesting. My daughter, his sibling, went to Bludenz, Austria last year and went to a little town called Hohenems. They had a small museum there, and Hannah was very curious and went in and went through the gift shop at the end, and the woman asked, "Why are you here?" And Hannah told them, and they said, "Don't go anywhere." And they came out with the book in German with my mother's family in it, the whole story, and gave Hannah a copy of the book. And just to reconnect, to find that there was some connection still there, was pretty amazing.
And this was the town that, Grandma, you alluded to earlier.
Right.
That they had the Jewish assistants in, and there was a Jewish survivor community there. In Bludenz, there was nothing, is my understanding.
Right.
There were no Jews left. Next door in Hohenems, there was a more religious community.
Yeah.
They had survived. And so when my sibling went to visit, Hohenems specifically, that is where a lot of the stories in Western Austria for the Jews live on.
And have you ever been back?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
I have been back, and I remember the first time Matt and I went back, and I had a teacher there that hated me. She, when I was in school, I hated her, and I told Matt, I want to walk to the cemetery and see if she's in there. And we did, and I found her grave.
To make sure she was gone.
Yeah, I mean, she hated me. And, but when we went back, don't forget, I was 13 when I came here. And when we went back and we looked at, everything took place in Catholicism in the Holy Cross Church, and they had a big, uh, big place, to hold fairs and that. And then when I went back and looked at everything looked so small. It wasn't as big as I thought it was and all that. It was interesting to go back. I went back to where we used to live and other people lived there. And I took Debbie, didn't I to show her the apartment where we lived.
They let us come in and look around.
And they let us look at it. And I said, that's where my dad's office was and all that, And it was strange going back to Austria. There was an old lady that remembered my mom. But otherwise, there wasn't anybody left that I knew. So that was our trip to Austria. Things had changed, but you couldn't expand too much. It started out, the city itself, when we lived there, was 9,800 people. But I don't think it expanded too much because it was in the middle, like a little nest in the Alps, so it couldn't expand too much to anything. But going back, it seemed strange going back. But I've also been back to Germany, and which was a mistake because everything came back to me. I'm glad my mother had, at the time before when she was alive, had told me don't do it. And I did, and I regretted going back because it brought back all the memories. But there's nobody back there anymore that's still alive. So, but I've had good memories and bad memories.
Well, and I so appreciate you being with us today, all of you being with
That's
us
okay.
to share these memories, both beautiful memories and the
Right.
difficult memories that each of us can learn from, right? And so for those who are watching this episode, I want to open it up to anyone who wants, and you can all respond if you want. What do you hope people take away from hearing this story, hearing your story?
Well, Matt and I, for many years, belonged to the Speakers Bureau and have given talks to schools and all different organizations. And most of them have been well received. But we have gone to schools and have also been confronted by students who told us, you really don't believe that stuff. And we believe that they probably heard it from their parents or something like that. And most of the time was well received. And I understand that Speakers Bureau is still going on with Henry Fenichel and everybody else. But I think it was a good thing that Matt and I did it. And I'm glad that it's still going on. And I think people need to be educated in order to understand what life was like, not just for them, but for people in different colors, different religions. And I'm glad that I was part of it. And I hope that the people that still are in the Speakers Bureau keep continuing educating people so the world can be a better place.
Thank you. And I know both of you are also so willing to share stories whenever we've asked. So we're just so thankful to everyone in your family for being willing to raise awareness and educate others about the Holocaust. It's very important work. And thank you for being my guest today. It was an honor to be with you.
And thank you, Zach and Hannah and Deborah. Thank you so much, Trinity.
Thank you.
To make sure you don't miss an episode, subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Let us know your thoughts on this episode. Our email is in the show notes. You can also connect with us on Instagram and TikTok at Holocaust and Humanity, and X and Facebook at CincyHHC. Hear My Story is a production of the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanity Center. The center's mission is to ensure that the lessons of the Holocaust inspire action today. This series is part of the Cynthia and Harold Gutman Family Center for Storytelling and is generously supported by Margaret and Michael Valentine. Visit us in person at Historic Union Terminal in Cincinnati, Ohio, or online at holocaustandhumanity.org. Managing producer is Ann Thompson. Consulting producer is Joyce Kamen. Technical producer is Robert Mills. Technical director is Josh Emerson. Select music is by Kik Lee. This is recorded at the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanity Center in Cincinnati, Ohio.